We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service.
Welcome to this episode of the PA Path Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Lohenry, and we are glad you can join us as we seek to better understand the PA profession.
The most exciting part about what I do is every day I walk in and I say, I have to show my value. What am I going to do? Because it's not the same as yesterday and things are going to change, and you just have to say, that's part of it. Things are going to change. Show your value.
Well, hello, and thank you for joining us for episode 56 in season 3. Today is Monday, December 26th, and we want to wish our listeners a happy Hanukkah for those who celebrate the Festival of Lights. We hope you enjoyed a wonderful celebration with family and friends. Yesterday was Christmas Day, and we wish those who celebrate Christmas a very Merry Christmas. And finally, today is Boxing Day for our listeners in other parts of the globe, and we wish you a joyous day with your family as well. Today we speak with Dr. Dane Baker. Dr. Baker is the Interim Provost for Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is a long-standing national leader and wonderfully humble human who has contributed much in his career to our profession, our country, and to the world. Dr. Baker talks with us about his career as a PA, his military career, and his leadership experiences in higher education. As always, you can learn more about our guests by going to our website at www.papathpodcast.com. Next week will be our season-ending reflection episode before Steph and I take a winter break to line up our guests for season 4. Happy holidays. Matt, thanks again for joining us. Could you tell us first about how you decided to become a PA so many years ago?
Yeah, no, I wish I could say that this was like a super planned thing that in the middle of the 1970s, I realized that, hey, this is it, that it came from a lightning bolt or a calling. But so I went to college initially and took a eclectic group of things that I liked. It was a university, it was a college then, now a university, where you could sort of pick a lot of your own courses. So I wound up taking a lot of courses in marine science. I started as a marine science major, marine biology, physical oceanography. I took a lot of courses in science, a lot of courses in criminal justice, and a lot of courses in psychology. And so I graduated, I guess, to my parents' chagrin, with the qualifications to arrest fish, but nothing else at the time. And I applied to a variety of government jobs at the time, got into some, but then was put on wait lists. Very complicated time. And I began working in a psychiatric institution with adolescents, many of whom were committed there by the court. And then I wound up going to graduate school for counseling psychology. And at a certain point, I decided that maybe I liked this sort of taking care of people, but didn't know what I wanted to do. So I applied into the master's degree in counseling psychology. I applied to BSN programs and got in. And I heard about the PA profession through somebody that I worked with at the hospital who was in PA school, and it sounded intriguing. And so at some point, I had to choose which of the 3 paths I was going to take. And the PA profession sounded so new and exciting that I decided that that was the direction that I was going to take. And I really never looked back after that. It was really exciting. So I had worked in mental health, but I also worked for a local group of the Heart Association doing CPR training, and just led me to this direction of the one. I mean, I knew a lot of nurses. I knew a lot of people that were either psychologists or counselors, but I didn't know a lot of PAs. I only knew 2. But that was enough. It was exciting. It was wonderful. I interviewed and I loved the concept.
And so you ended up going to Hahnemann University, as I recall. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. At that time, I think there were probably only one or two PA programs in the state of Pennsylvania. There were none in New Jersey. It was before Rutgers started, I guess. And there was only one in the Philadelphia area. I think there's close to 10 now. And I wasn't, for family reasons, I was not, I was engaged in things, and I was not, and my wife's job was there. So I was not going to move. So I figured, it was Hahnemann or bust. And I applied, I got in, and I was fairly excited to do that. So I stayed in my hometown of Philadelphia, got to travel a lot after that, and did travel for my rotations and preceptorships to more rural areas, which was fun.
Okay.
But born and raised in Philadelphia and went to PA school there.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And so tell us your mental health background that you had just alluded to previously. What was that like going into PA school and having that background? And did that impact you in your choice of clinical careers?
It probably didn't influence me much. I did a psychiatry rotation, but didn't ever decide to go in there. So what influenced me was a job I had before. So when we were teenagers, my wife and I worked in a nursing home. She was a waitress and I was a dishwasher, very prestigious job at the time, dishwasher in a small nursing home, but loved working with the elderly. So that's when I knew that I would beg the people at Hahnemann, Nate Alston, the wonderful, may rest in peace, clinical coordinator there for many, many years. He's a guy that if they had a Nobel Prize for clinical coordinating, he would have gotten it, or an Olympic medal. And they had one geriatric site, and at the Philadelphia Geriatric Center, a very large place. The main campus was 1,000 employees and 5 different nursing homes, a hospital for the elderly, a rehab center, outpatient centers. They had a bunch of PAs working there, and from Duke and Baylor and other places. It was an eclectic group. And so that's where I did my preceptorship, and I stayed there when I graduated. But I knew from the dishwashing experience that I loved working with the elderly. Loved it.
That's fantastic. So how long did you do that work with the elderly at that site?
I worked for the geriatric center for over 8 years, but it wasn't continuous. So I worked for them. First, I could not get a clinical job. So I got a job in clinical research trials, NIH trials. So I did clinical work because we did, histories, physicals, stress tests. We did a bunch of things on people before we put them in the trial. Just the nature of the trial. And then when they had the first job opening in the outpatient, I took it. And then a job that included an outpatient office and 3 half days in the nursing home. And that was like my favorite. And so I was there, and then I got this great opportunity to go into family practice and a good opportunity to go into ENT. And I didn't stay in them. I went back to the geriatric center because at the time, it was a place that gave you a lot of opportunity. They asked me, I volunteer for anything. So they said, "Oh, do you want to write a grant?" "Sure, I'll write a grant." And when they called me back, they said, "You worked for this program that was just research only, and we extended it to become a senior fitness center that's medically supervised and a cardiac rehab center. And it's run by cardiology and pulmonology. And so it's attached to a very sophisticated, at the time, nuclear stress testing lab and echo lab and a lab that did pulmonary function testing." So they said, "Do you want to run this center? It includes cardiac rehab and exercise and nutritional counseling and research and some testing labs." And I jumped at it. And so I went back to the geriatric center and spent quite a few years, and then was promoted to an assistant VP level at the medical department. Fairly stressful job, but you ran the medical practices. We had a lot of employed physicians, and then a lot of that came in from other health systems to do subspecialties. but we also ran credentialing. We ran the quality and safety program committees and pharmaceutics and therapeutics, a P&T committee. So did a lot of the things with the medical department. That wonderful place broke up into many little pieces years later, and right before I left.
Wow. So, and at the same time, you, as I understand it, also had a career in the military. So do you want to talk a little bit about when you entered the military, when you re-entered the military and the reserves and kind of the roles you played in that?
Yeah, so I had a friend who, said, this is a great job. He introduced me to people. I worked my way through mostly in the reserve forces. I was in the Army National Guard for a while. I was a CW2, a Chief Warrant Officer 2. I was in the Army Reserve and wound up in the Air National Guard, where I spent a lot of my career in a air refueling wing at a McGuire Air Force Base that was half full-timers and half part-timers. So because we were refueling all the time, and we even had a full-time PA slot there for quite a long time. And we had a variety of full-time and part-time slots. It was great place to travel. So I spent 21 years in the military. I went from Warrant Officer 1 to Lieutenant Colonel. And then eventually when I got promoted, my third or fourth promotion at the university, I couldn't maintain, at the lifestyle at having these two jobs, because as you know, as you move up in the military, even if you're in the reserve force, they expect you to work. It's not 1 weekend a month. Then you're going in. I was going in 2 mornings a week and 1 evening a week, and then you have your 3 days of weekends, and you would spend quite a bit of time in different, and then you were active duty for periods of time. So spent quite a bit of time, and my civilian job, as I called it, was less forgiving at the time, because there was a time when I, worked for up to 5 places at a time. I did moonlighting at a hospital, at acute care. I did the admissions for both the hospital and the a detox center attached to each other. Mm-hmm. And then I worked on the mobile mental health team, doing physical evaluations of people and giving them medicine. And at the same time, I was doing some part-time teaching in different places, and was working in with the reserve. So I did it for 21 years, retired, loved it. And it was a great experience. I got to travel to a lot of places, some places that are super, that people travel for vacations, like London and Japan, and some places where people don't travel on vacations. And then also I had a chance to get chosen for a lot of interesting things. I had a person who was a mentor of mine, and probably still is, and she was a nurse who became a brigadier general. So she had these things that we had to go on that were trips where we would be supporting the military in different countries. And so first one was in Albania, and she said, we're providing them with support. I need a team to go with me. And I said, well, sure, I'm up for it. If you want me to carry your suitcases, whatever you want me to do, I'm there for it. But it was really exciting. We got to go to their military hospitals. We got to go to areas where there was still a lot of, I would say, rotting old Soviet munitions that had to be cleaned up in a clean way. And there were a variety of other U.S. government services there on the ground at the time. So that was really interesting. But you got a chance to do some really interesting things and see things that you would have never seen before. We got to see our strategic stockpile over in Europe. And, you get to give your opinion on things that were pretty interesting.
So it sounds like this entire time in your military career, you spent this doing non-medical things for the most part. You weren't there as a PA, but you brought your PA lens, if you will.
Yeah, so I did both. I was a PA, so I did PA stuff. And when I was deployed, I got to pick where I went. So most of the time, it was either acute care, which is what you would now call in the civilian world fast track, ER, or I got to do family medicine for people who were on temporary duty someplace else. And I would fill in for them in different places. So I did clinical work, and I loved that. That was a lot of fun. But I also did a lot of administrative work. I coordinated the disaster drills. I coordinated mock codes. I was a total quality management coordinator for the base. I did, for a period of time, I did a lot of their biological, chemical training for a lot of people. I was sent to the, so I, went to all the places where you get trained for these things, and just some really interesting places. And then I got, during the anthrax vaccine and smallpox vaccine, when there was a lot of, especially in the Air Force, there was a lot of resistance to vaccinations because of some articles in the Atlantic and some other places. So I got sent to and the Pentagon had this vaccine spokesperson training. And we would go and get media training, but we also learned everything there was to learn about cold chain supplies and about side effects of the vaccines. These were not new vaccines, as you know. These are the same dry vax that they used when I was a kid. I had to get revaccinated. And I said to my mom, I called her. I said, "Do you know when I got my smallpox vaccine?" And it was 1966. So it was, and it turned out to be.
Oh, wow.
That same vaccine, right? And anthrax, this was an old vaccine used for veterinarians. So it wasn't, you could question their effectiveness because you could never really test, other than animals, whether they could prevent disease. You could really question that, and you could question why you needed 5 anthrax shots, but you couldn't, but the safety, you knew what the side effects were. Anthrax vaccine was pretty safe, and dry vax had a lot of side effects, but they were well known since the 50s, right? So
Sure.
I became that, and eventually I became the administrator for the medical department. I worked for a urologist who was the head of what they call professional services, which was essentially the physicians and the dentists and the optometrists and the nurse practitioners and the PAs. And so I became his administrator. So.
Okay. And you retired what year?
I retired in 2009. I want to say 2009.
2009.
Yeah.
So were you deployed in the first Gulf War to Riyadh?
I was not. I was deployed in Desert Shield, which is before there was fighting. And then we wound up backfilling eventually in South Carolina at an Air Force base where everyone deployed to set up a hospital. And actually there was very few providers seeing patients. And yet it's a community where it's so beautiful that there was a lot of retirees. And so everything was backing up. And so then they shipped us off in a C-130 there and said, "We just need you to backfill for a while until we can figure out a solution for it." And so I was in Desert Shield, but Desert Shield was not Desert Storm. There was no fighting at the time. So, yeah.
Well, yeah. And Desert Storm was so fast.
Yes.
there wasn't a whole lot of time to be in Desert Storm. It's very different from the Iraq-Afghanistan era, of course.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. And by the time the second Gulf Wars happened, I was already, sort of phased out a little bit.
Sure.
So I did volunteer to go over at the beginning, and my turn never came up.
Okay. Well, thank you for your service, Matt. I appreciate that. What led you into the academic side of things?
Yeah, so that was another thing that I wish I totally had planned, but I did not. So I was, a healthcare administrator at the time. I was still seeing patients maybe 2 or 3 half days a week, but I was mostly an administrator. And at that time, what was happening at the institution and what was happening in healthcare and the tremendous amount of time I spent on Medicare billing issues, it was less fun. And I felt that my years as an adjunct professor at the time at Hahnemann, and then eventually I was an adjunct professor at a lot of different places. PCOM was one of them, Arcadia, Salus Optometry School, Salus Audiology School, the nursing school at University of Pennsylvania. So I realized I loved the teaching part more than I liked the administrative part in the healthcare world. And there was an opportunity for a founding program director at the second PA program to open up in Philadelphia. And the first one, which was Hahnemann, was very supportive. In fact, the consultant was from Hahnemann. And so they let me know about it. It existed. I applied for it. I got the job and was there. I was teaching courses, but there was no healthcare programs. I was teaching an introduction toward the courses and different courses that I could teach, like one or two courses. But basically, I was there to start the first healthcare programs at what was at the time called Philadelphia College of Textiles and Science. This was a long, long time ago.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was best known for materials engineering and business and architecture, and not really well known for healthcare because they didn't do it. And so, they said, well, there wasn't much of an infrastructure for it, but there was a big appetite to do it, and there was money behind it and a lot of administrative support. So I was able to start the program. Things were different then. There was a thing called letter of review. There was no provisional accreditation at the time. And we started the PA program. I guess it's going on. It's still running. It's 30 years old. And we started that. And we started a second campus in New Jersey and started a master's degree. And eventually they changed their name to Philadelphia University. And eventually we merged with Thomas Jefferson University, which was we had about 3,800 students when we merged, and we were 25% healthcare programs. And then we merged with and we were a 130-year-old place, and we merged with a 190-year-old place that started as a medical school, and then was a large hospital system. But it was mostly a medical school, nursing, pharmacy, and it was all healthcare. But it was really close geographically, and it was the perfect marriage of two places. It was one of the first mergers, and according to the Chronicle of Higher Ed, it was one of the first successful mergers. And I would probably say it was really interesting to be a part of, because I had moved from professor program director to interim dean to school dean to college executive dean. And when we merged, I was the provost at Philadelphia University. So, I was one of the 5 people initially involved in the merger. And the merger was fascinating because, even if you have 8,400 students, you're still tiny compared to a 35,000 employee healthcare system that's been through 7 mergers. I mean, they have 18 hospitals and more outpatient sites than you can count, a lot of them in very specific areas, because they put all these health systems together, but we also have a health insurance company. And then we have this very large GME program with probably close to now 1,800 residents and fellows and across the system.
Wow.
And a fairly large research portfolio, both clinical and basic science research portfolios. So it's a complicated place, but it was fun to work in. And I had worked for some of the clinical practices years ago. And so I knew a lot of the people. So it was a very interesting, that was an interesting part of my life, but I always continued to do some teaching. So I eventually had to stop clinically practicing at a period of time when it became really complicated.
Yeah. I have to imagine, first of all, what a great get for somebody that's thinking about starting a whole healthcare professional portfolio, to bring in somebody that's not only PA, but somebody who also has been in leadership roles, both in the military, but also in the civilian sector at the nursing home facility that you're originally with, and so forth and so on. You had a different set of lenses to look at the situation from, with an administrative eye. And I have to believe that was a big part of their success early on.
I mean, I think it was. I mean, Yeah, I often say to people as a leader, I said, one of the things I can at least say I don't have the answers to all issues because things come up. It's really complex now and more complex every day, but there is a side of empathy. I mean, I was a student 5 times in my life, so I know what that is. I know what it is to borrow money and not have any money and go to school and have loans. And I was also a parent of college students paying for those loans, and I can empathize with them. I was a preceptor of students for years, so I can empathize with our preceptors. I was a guest lecturer. I was an adjunct professor. I was a full-time professor, a director, a dean, and a provost. And I was in hospital administration, so I understood that side. And I was also in, the nursing home administration part and hospital administration. And so I can empathize with a lot of people every day that I dealt with. I could speak their language. I had done so many things and worked in research administration. I had done so many things that I wasn't the master of any one of those things, but I was, I had done them enough that I understood them. I understood the lexicon, and I most certainly understood what those pain points were for them. When you're working that many years with physicians and nurses and rehabilitation therapists and PAs and nurse practitioners, the sensitive issues. And, I took opportunities with the PAEA, which was called APAP before that, the Educational Association, Physician Assistant Education Association, different roles with the AAPA, the American Academy of Physician Assistants, and then different roles with the ARCPA that accredits PA programs, and with Middle States, our regional accreditor that accredits lots of different universities. So some of the little details and sensitive areas and pain points I understood going in, and it helped. I think the most helpful part of our merger was, and I would love to say it was our flawless execution, and it was pretty good. We paid attention to culture early, but I would say the fact that we didn't have too much in common. It's what everybody said was crazy, turned out not to be crazy. In other words, what was maybe 200 academic programs, we only overlapped in 3. That was it.
Wow.
So there wasn't massive layoffs, and it wasn't done for financial
reasons. That helps.
It definitely helped people less afraid.
I was just going to say, Matt, I have to believe that diversity of the portfolios of both institutions probably really enriched the whole process of the merger to make it a much stronger outcome.
That's it. I think we called this early wins and the merger thesis. So the Philadelphia University side that I came from had already been developing medical devices since the 1950s. The first Gore-Tex graft that went into somebody's leg was developed there. In textiles, it was developed in engineering. The collar that I wore when I hurt my neck was designed there. So it's a material, right? And
that's really cool.
And we had our occupational therapy department, along with the industrial design department, product design, had developed 250 products for rehabilitation. And so it was, we got to, and our architects and interior designers have been designing hospital spaces and other things for years. It isn't like we abandoned the other parts. Like a person come to one of our very popular fashion and well-ranked fashion programs, and they wanted to be a fashion designer, and they wanted to, work for Tommy Hilfiger, and they wanted to work for Vera Wang. We weren't saying you couldn't do this. We never said to anybody you had to design hospital gowns, right? But there were synergies that were unbelievably cool, right, that no one had thought of. We do a writing group with trauma surgeons. This is our writing professors and people who see terrible trauma every day, and we give out awards for that. So there's things that were very cool, and we also didn't have to worry about whose mascot we were going to use, because the Jefferson side of it, they were a medical school, nursing school. They did not have any sports teams, right? And so the mascot, the basketball team, all those other things, we have a Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts basketball coach. And so there was no fighting over what would that be. And so when we merged into Thomas Jefferson University, I can't say it was everything was smooth, but it went smoother than I would have anticipated.
So you were the provost on the Philadelphia side when this merger was being discussed. So you were in on those conversations early on. I imagine if you were just a program director, not that that's just but provost is basically the COO of an institution. So you had the chance to have an impact on that and give insight into the importance of the culture of Philadelphia. But it sounds like also knew that your role as provost might be in jeopardy when you moved over. Is that correct?
So everything's an unknown. And originally at the table, because we didn't know we were going to date, but we didn't know what would due diligence show and whether we would get married, right? And so at the table was the two presidents, the two chief academic officers, provosts, the two CFOs, and the two chief operating officers. That was the whole table, right? Because after that, if we weren't going to get serious, we weren't going to get it out of this group, right? And so you never really know what your role is going to be. I know that the provost at Jefferson, wonderful guy named Mark Tukachinsky, he had many jobs. He was provost, but he was also the dean of the medical school. He also had just given up the role because of too many things. He was the president of the medical staff. That's like 4,000 physicians, right? He was also
that's a big job
of the faculty practice. So he was also a researcher with grants and his own biotech company. And he was also an executive vice president for the enterprise that sits above the hospitals and the university. So he found a great position for me as what he called Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, which is an SVP AA sort of role that ran the academic side. And that was, it was all things I was used to doing, but not at the scale that we were at the time. So there's always anxiety when a new leader comes in. So I've lived through many probably 6 or 7 presidents, 8 provosts. I worked under 10 deans. And the Harvard Business Review would say that when a new leader comes in, within 1 year, half the people on their leadership team underneath them would be gone and replaced with people that they felt more comfortable with, right? And so it's sort of like being a PA really well prepared me, because when I walk into a clinical place, whether it was in the military or in the hospital or in the nursing home or in the emergency department, wherever I walked into a clinical facility, I was always proving myself. And like I know PAs have complained to me about years, well, I feel like a resident all my life. I always have to prove myself. My attending comes in, they don't have to prove themselves. The most exciting part about what I do is every day I walk in and I say, I have to show my value. What am I going to do? Because it's not the same as yesterday, and things are going to change. And you just have to say, that's part of it. Things are going to change. Show your value every day, whether you're a clinical PA in family practice, which I was, or you're the senior vice provost, or you're the provost. You have to come in and you have to show your value to the company every day. You have to always think of, how am I providing value to this practice, or how am I providing value to the institution that I'm working for? And I think that's been, for me, one of the secrets to the fact that I was not replaced with many different leadership changes. And in fact, I was, continually promoted my jobs no matter where I was, approximately every 5 years or so. So I think you really do have to just come in and I think that was very helpful during the merger.
I think you were alluding to this earlier, having a willingness to go with the flow on change. And it sounds like that has been your key to success, that you've always been flexible when change is coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I've gotten more involved in the literature of change management and mergers and acquisitions, but change is a constant. It is. It's the only thing that you can actually know is going to happen, is that things will be different. Certainly higher ed has changed. Healthcare has drastically changed for a variety of reasons. I mean, would you have imagined that we would be telling the people we're preparing as PAs, that we would be telling them that they might work in a retail pharmacy, or that they might be doing telemedicine, or they might be working someday for Amazon? It's a very dynamic marketplace that that you really have to adapt to, because if you don't adapt, the market will replace you with a cheaper, faster, better model of you. And you really do have to understand, and you have to make a decision early. Do I think this is worth staying with? Do I have a fit here, or do I not? And if you don't, there's plenty of job opportunities. And if you think you do, then you have to adapt to your new boss, and you have to adapt to the way the vision that the place has to change.
Yeah, absolutely. As a provost, or as a dean, or as a leader in PA education, you are constantly looking at the horizon. So as you see the changes that are happening in our PA profession that you alluded to, and some of the things like the doctorate in PA education, or the optimal team practice movement, what excites you about the future of the PA profession, and what things are you kind of keeping an eye on for your institution?
So I think that the things that continually are in flux are the settings that we'll be working in as healthcare providers, the actual mix of providers, and the skill shifting of those providers and what they will do, not just what we'll do in contrast with what doctors and nurses do, but also in contrast to what artificial intelligence will do. And a variety of other technologies, continually looking at the landscape of concierge medicine, of hospital at home medicine, and where do we fit into that, at retail medicine, and where do we fit into that, at telemedicine, and where do we fit into that. And then specific to PA, as you know, there's been two fairly exciting things. One of them has been the name change, the move from physician assistant to physician associate, which has been a discussion since the 70s. And then the optimal team practice. And even though I see both of those things moving forward, those things are driven nationally, but they're implemented at a state level. So just like the prescriptive practices were in the 80s. So I think we need to be patient, but we also need to be flexible in that we will be working into different settings that we didn't imagine. As a lot of PAs will say, go into orthopedic surgery, and they'll be doing the rounds. Well, almost most of our total hip replacements are done outpatient now. People go home the same day. People are getting, coronary bypass graft surgery, and they're going home on day 2, day 3. It's just very different. And so telehealth, remote patient monitoring, hospital at home, these things are all going to become the reality. The other thing that PAs need to be heavily involved in is population health and quality and safety. And we are going to move away. We keep saying this, but it's slow, but we're moving away from fee for service to more of a outcomes-based, quality-based metrics driving the reimbursement. And I think that's a change. The thing I tell all young PAs and PA students is, as you look at the future and the longevity of your career, know that you can go almost anywhere. So, I've done administration in healthcare and in hospitals. I've done clinical, I've done research, so it's been exciting. And you can move places, but you have to, number one, be flexible. And number two, know that you're going to have to get another skill set. And the more you can get, the more invaluable you will be. You will be irreplaceable. If you are the only PA in the practice in Philadelphia that speaks Spanish fluently, you're going to be more valuable than the other people in the practice. If you're the only one that understands medical informatics and the electronic health record, you're invaluable. If you're the only one that can do smoking cessation and weight loss counseling, you're going to be invaluable. If you're the one that understands population health, if you understand telemedicine, if you get the provider training for cannabis, for medical cannabis, there are certain things where you can make yourself totally irreplaceable almost in your practice, but it's not by doing the traditional things that we all learn to do and are great at, right? So, mastered prescribing medicines, mastered doing procedures, mastered doing assisting in operations. And all of that has changed. We used to be holding retractors, but, it's different now that everything's done laparoscopically and things are done with robotics, Da Vinci. Everything is different. I was the best suturer. Well, if you're using mostly staples and derma glue, you know what I mean? Some of this stuff, things are just going to change, and you have to be really flexible with that and also get a bunch of additional skills. My boss calls this medicine plus. He believes that physicians will be partially taken over by PAs, nurse practitioners, and artificial intelligence. So he says in our medical school, the physicians choose another skill they're going to learn. And so it's a pretty, it is the way of the future. You have to be pretty agile now, taking formal courses in the metaverse. I have no idea what that's going to mean for the healthcare community and PAs in specific, but I know it's probably not going away. So if it's probably not going away, it's probably something I should know about. That's just, what I see in the future, but I do see that the settings will really change. And I think the way we're reimbursed will really change, and it'll be much more population, much more keeping people out of the hospital, and much more emphasis on quality and safety. And things will continue to go to the lowest. The economics say that things will go to the lowest cost provider. And at one time, that was us. That is no longer us. And so I think that they will continue to, you have to continue to show your value.
Well, Matt, thank you so much. This has been really insightful, and I appreciate your time. Well, we want to thank our guest, Dr. Matt Dane Baker, for sharing his insights and his time with us. What an incredible human being. And he offered such great wisdom about a work ethic and maintaining flexibility. Tune in next week as Steph and I conduct our Season 3 reflection episode, and we look back at the guests that we've had an opportunity to learn from this last season, and we'll look ahead at what is to come. Until next time, we wish you success with whatever path you are walking in life, and thank you for joining us. The purpose of this podcast is to provide news and information on the PA profession, and is for informational purposes only. The views and perspectives expressed on this podcast are those of the speakers and guests, and do not necessarily reflect the positions or policies of the University of Arizona.